Yes, it's surrounding. If you just stay about, don't get too close. They'll hear you. I mean, say about 5 inches. I'll get a tape measure out there.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to start the service with a tribute to one of our favorite activist members, Jacob Johns. And so I'm going to sing, and I hope you'll join me by standing and singing Pete Seeger's version of Jacob's Ladder. Jacob Johns is right now in Minnesota protesting the tar sands oil pipe that's trying to go under the Mississippi River. So what a fine tribute to him. Hopefully this will be when you stand up and sing with me, and I think you'll see the lyrics on the screen. Jacob's Ladder by Pete Seeger. The words are a little different.
Thank you so much, Pam. Beautiful way to get us started together this morning. Welcome to all of you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in the wider world. And when I use that word liberal, I mean it in the truest sense of the word. That's right. I want to begin, as always, by embracing all that you bring with you, all your uniqueness, your unique beliefs and background and lifestyle and experiences and all that helps make you who you are here this morning. And I also want to include those, of course, who are streaming with us, who've been streaming with us for, for years now, but certainly very intensely for the past year and a half. Glad that you're still with us, and we're going to be continuing to stream and have a virtual presence with us each Sunday. So glad to have everybody. And I have to begin by especially saying what a great day to be able to welcome everybody back who wants to be here. You know, no strings attached. So you can just come and enjoy the community, and to look out and see so many wonderful faces and friends and new friends and those sort of things here today is it's extraordinary. I know, for something that is so usual among humans to gather in community, to be able to look into the faces of others and feel so privileged that we can do so. So this is a very special day to have people, to have our services open to everyone. So welcome back to all of you. Glad to have you. I am actually going to welcome another very special person in our lives, our Board of Trustees Vice President, Lynn Janishian, who's going to give us a very special announcement about something that's happening not after this service.
Next.
Not today.
Not today.
Which is what I said at the start of the previous service. But Lynn will let you know when.
Yeah, we'll let you know.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's hard for me to believe that it has been a year, almost a year, since you, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, used the power of your voice and our democratic principles to elect 6 people to our Board of Trustees in what was likely the most dramatic and contested election in the history of our church. I think my fellow board members would agree that we all experienced some level of joyful surprise, a huge sense of relief, and most importantly, a deep gratitude to those of you who showed up, participated, and put your faith in this group during a time of uncertainty, confusion, and to add a little extra flair to it all, a viral pandemic. Your message was clear to us. You are in charge. You will tell us which direction to go. And our job is to hold the wheel steady, be transparent in our work, and keep you as informed as we can of the weather patterns of stormy seas or smooth sailing. My message this morning is the second of 2 required announcements according to our bylaws to alert the congregation of our upcoming annual congregational meeting next Sunday, June 13th, 2021, from 12:30 to 2 p.m. So even though we like you to be engaged all year long, at annual meeting time, we need you more than ever. For us to be able to conduct the business of our church, we need to reach a quorum of at least 50 qualified voting members to show up in person, participate, and let your voices be heard. Whether you're a first service person like me, and we'll need you to return at 12:30, or a second service person, we're asking each of you to step away from Zoom and any online streaming and meet us here in person in the sanctuary. You can feel free to bring a lunch. We will be providing coffee, tea, I believe some cookies, and I think Darrell, who's trying to get your vote for a Board of Trustees, so might be bringing some oranges for you healthy people. Gordon Diddens has graciously agreed to serve as our moderator to keep us on track. Tom Mosier will serve as our parliamentary advisor, a role he has taken on not only in our monthly board meetings, but also our weekly work group. His expertise has been invaluable to us, not to mention he's pretty much an all-around great guy with a devotion to UUCS that is truly inspirational. You should have received a packet of information via email on May 28th, which was 2 weeks ahead of time as stipulated by our bylaws. That email has links to the agenda and all the documents that we will be discussing and voting on. Hard copies should have been sent to those members who do not have email, and they will also be available here in the sanctuary for the actual meeting time. This meeting will be recorded and available to watch later, but to fully engage and participate, you will need to attend in person. Voting will take place on candidates for the Board of Trustees, for the nominating team, and for the endowment team. Other topics that require your voice are our annual budget and proposed updates to our Articles of Incorporation. I have full faith that you will show up. You've already shown us that you will and that you continue to be engaged. Thank you. I'll see you next week.
Hey, very nice.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And has this board met in person at all? No. You haven't, yeah. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing, right? Because the board has done really an incredible job during a very difficult year, following another very difficult year. And you've not only been meeting once a month and had very transparent and open meetings, but have been meeting on Monday nights for some time to look at our church documents and try to get those updated in a way that they actually still make sense for us, with the help of others like Tom Mosier. So it's just been you've done a lot of hard work on behalf of this congregation, and I think you really have upheld the trust that was put in you guys a year ago, and I just want to thank you and the entire board for an incredible year under difficult times, and yet you were able to accomplish so much on our behalf. So thank you. I'll probably say something like that again next week.
Yes.
We're going to greet one another in just a moment, but I just wanted to let those of you know who have children here. Children are always welcome here, of course, in our sanctuary. We often have religious education, but on Sundays, but we're sort of just getting back in the swing of things, and so our religious education program probably won't be up and running until the start of the actual next school year, although we'll have some activities between now and then. But yeah, just make yourselves at home, kiddos. And there's some activity tables in the back. If you get bored, you can go to those and do whatever activities are there. Also, if I start talking and I get really boring, you just like what most people do is they just go like this.
Oh, no.
Okay,
No.
so you're welcome to take a nap. If that helps, okay? But I'm so glad you're all here. Really, thank you for being here. Okay, all right, okay. So we're going to take a few moments now to greet one another, as is also the custom at the start of our service. So do say hello to those that you know and love. Make some new friends today, especially if you're first joining us. Please don't be shy. And those of you who are streaming with us, feel free to text or call or email somebody that you're thinking of. as always, there'll be more opportunity to visit with one another during our social hour following the service, so please feel free to stick around for that. For those who don't know, there's coffee and tea and whatnot behind the wall there, so the art wall. But for now, we are going to move forward by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Our opening reflection is this little poem by Gary Whitehead called One-Legged Pigeon. In a flock on Market, just below Union Square, the last to land and standing a little canted, it teetered, I want to say now, though it's hardly true, like Ahab, toward starboard, and regarded me with blood-red eyes. We all lose something, though that day I hadn't lost a thing. I saw in that imperfect bird no antipathy, no envy, no vengeance. It needed no pity, but just a crumb, something to hop toward.
Well, our first hymn today is number 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. If you'd like to stand, if you are willing and able, and join us. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom of each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
It is now time for our story for all ages. If you are of any age, but particularly of a young age, and you want to come and gather up here towards the front, you can. I brought a special guest, so you can, yeah, You can just, if you can sit there, or you can sit right here on the floor. Sit here where you can see, where I can see you, though. Okay? Because I have a person I want you to be able to see. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Good. Anybody else? Don, did you want to? No. All right. Yeah, come on up. Come. So everybody knows that I'm a terrible storyteller. So I always cheat by bringing a friend with me to help out. So today I brought a friend some of you will recognize. Yes, this is my friend, the world's greatest discoverologist, Professor Marty Pants. That's Tance with a Z. Yes, Professor Pants with a Z. And for those who haven't met you yet, do you mind reminding us what exactly is it that a discoverologist is? Well, just as it sounds, a discoverologist is a bipedal anthropomorph. A bipedal anthropomorph, you mean a person, that uses protoplasmic endowments. Protoplasmic endowments, you mean your hands. And ocular faculties, oh yes, that would be your eyes, to ascertain phenomenon. To discover things. So a discoverologist discovers things, okay? All right. Now, what is it exactly that brings you here today, Dr. Pants with a Z? I am on the verge of my greatest discovery. Oh my gosh, that sounds really exciting. Well, tell us, what is it? What is what? Yeah, what is your greatest discovery you're on the verge of discovering? Well, I don't know. I haven't discovered it yet. Oh, I see. Well, anyway, I hope you'll let us know when you do. What are you doing here? Well, I'm actually here to lead the service today. Eureka! What is it? Did you discover something? Did you discover your greatest discovery ever? No, but I discovered why you're here today. Okay, well, I think that I just told you that, but good for you. Yes, and I discovered it. Yes, you should know that Dr. Marty Pants with a Z often discovers things that people have already discovered. So, but that doesn't bother him at all. Okay, so what does this lead a service mean? Well, leading a service is with the help of our worship leader, Lisa over here, and our musicians and our audio visual technicians that we help lead our congregation in songs and readings and rituals. And in a few minutes, I'll actually be giving today's sermon. Eureka! Well, now what is it that you've discovered? I discovered what a service is. Okay, well, that's pretty impressive. And let's see, what are you going to be talking about today? Well, I'm actually going to be talking about tolerance. You guys know what tolerance means? What does it mean? Well, let's see. Tolerance has a lot of different ideas of what it means. For some, it means just putting up with things that annoy us, like a toothache, very much like a toothache. Sometimes people have a toothache and they wait until it gets so bad that they've got to go to the dentist, although if you have a toothache, you shouldn't wait until it gets so bad to go see a dentist. What else does it mean? Well, it also means that for some, tolerance means being with people who might be different from them. Maybe they have different beliefs or look different or come from a different place. What else? Well, tolerance can mean for some a lot more than just being able to put up with things that we don't like or people that are different. It means being able to actually love and care for each other, no matter what our differences are. Being tolerant for some is a way of living and being. Like a religion. Yes, very much like a religion, Professor Pants. That's Pants with a Z. Yes, Dr. Pants with a Z. Our religion, Unitarianism, is all about tolerance. It is a religion based on the very principle that we should be able to live and to care for each other no matter how different we might be. Eureka! Oh, you discovered something again. this may just be my greatest discovery ever after all. Well, good, and I don't think we need to ask what it is, but I'm going to ask, what is it that you discovered? I just discovered tolerance. Very good. Well, I hope that tolerance is a lesson, that discovery that none of us ever forget, Dr. Pants. That's Pants with a Z. Yes, and I'll try not to forget that either.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
Thank you, Michelina.
My goodness.
And thank you, Donna and Kelsey, for leading us in our song today, too. Our music director, Deb Jackman, is away on vacation, so some of our talented choir members are helping out, so thank you both. Yes, we're going to have our candles of care now for those who are most on our hearts and minds. I want to begin with a candle for Diane Foster, Alan Foster's sister, who is recovering from a broken hip. So please keep her in your thoughts. And also, this just in, I just found this out this morning. Our members, Dave and Millie Roberts, are celebrating 62 years today.
Oh, wow.
62 years.
Wow.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
And actually 55 years, you've been members here for 55 of those years. Wow. Well, thank you both so much for being here.
That's great.
Great to have you back, and congratulations. Let's take a moment of silence on behalf of others that you might be thinking of at this time, and as always, you're welcome to name them aloud at this time, if you'd like. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion.
Now is the time in our service for meditation or contemplation. So I invite you to find a receptive posture. Close your eyes if you wish, and take a couple of deep breaths. I will lead you into the silence with these words from poet Rosemary Watala Trummer in the 4th of July parade. Right down the middle of Main Street, the woman with the long red braids and fairy wings strapped to her back rode a unicycle more than 2 times taller than she was, rode it with balance and grace, her arms stretched out as if swimming through gravity, as if embracing space, her smile an invitation to join in her bliss. How simple it is, really, to make of ourselves a gate that swings open to the joy that is. How simple, like tossing candy in a parade, to share the key to the gate.
I'm going to invite you to participate in our reading today by opening a gray hymnal to number 646. Number 646, a responsive reading. Since we've not been able to do responsive readings for some time, why not today? Number 646. Looks like everybody's about there. So let's see, since we have a big enough group today, why don't we start with this side of the room. And this side can be our respondents. Now, respondents, keep in mind you're a little bit outnumbered. So you gotta carry a little more weight, okay? And then we'll close on the last sentence together as a congregation. Okay? We clasp the hands of those that go before us.
And the hands of those who come after us. We enter the circle of judgment, and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined within us, and the larger circle of all creatures, passing in and out of life, who also conveys. To the music so subtle and fast that never hears,
Except in fragments.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Pam Larratt. I'm so happy to be back in my favorite spot right here in front of you and seeing my family and the members of the church and everyone looking good. This song by Phil Oakes was written at a very tumultuous time in the Vietnam era, and wonder sometimes if things have changed all that much. I think they have, but show me the prison, show me the jail, has gone stale. I'll show you, young ones, so many reasons why. But for fortune, go you or I, you and I. Show me the alley, show me the train, show me the homeless as they sleep out in the rain. I'll show you, young one, so many reasons why. There but for fortune, oh, you or I, you and I. Show me the whiskey stains on the floor. Show me the drunkard as he stumbles out the door. I'll show you, young ones, so many reasons why. There but for fortune, oh, you or I, you or I. Show me the country where the bombs had to fall. Show me the ruins of the buildings once so tall. I'll show you, young ones, so many reasons why. There but for fortune, go you or I. There but for fortune, go you or I, you or I. Thank you.
Thanks again, Pam. It's great to have you back where you belong. I want to acknowledge that this is Pride Month around the country, and this is our Pride Sunday. Of course, it's our first Sunday back, and I'm going to be talking about tolerance today for Pride Sunday. But I wanted to sort of preface my remarks by saying that I'm not going to be necessarily speaking directly to those in the LGBTQ ABCDEFG community. Not because I don't care about my friends who count themselves in that identity group, but you know, I really feel like today it's important to stress our common humanity. It's important for me to stress our common humanity in addressing the social issues plaguing our country, because it's not being done, and it's not being done often by people of my ideological, philosophical persuasions often. And so I'm committed to uplifting the understanding that we are all part of one family And that is the place we have to start if we're going to move into, in meaningful ways, to address identity issues. Because if we don't recognize that we are all fundamentally the same and part of one family, why would we care? Why else would we care? Right? Otherwise, it's just segregation. And so for this Pride Sunday, I'm speaking of tolerance, of the history of tolerance, actually, as it impacts us all. So this is my Pride Sunday sermon. And I'm going to begin by actually talking about a Unitarian minister and scholar named Earl Wilbur Morse, who was around long enough ago that he died in 1956 at a ripe old age. He died before there was a Unitarian Universalist Association, which wasn't founded until 1961. And long before there was a list of 7 principles that many now consider to be the essence of Unitarian Universalism, which were not founded until the 1980s. Right? And our church has been here since the 1880s. And in his 2-volume work, A History of Unitarianism, written in 1945, Morse provides us with a prior list of what he calls Unitarianism's fundamental principles: freedom, reason, and tolerance. These, he says, have evolved in its history, in Unitarianism's history, and been ever increasingly realized as the necessary conditions of the fullest development of religious thought and life. These are the principles that are the summit of religious life. In other words, as Unitarianism has progressed, these principles have become even more essential to understanding what we're all about: freedom, reason, and tolerance. Although Morse acknowledges that Michael Servetus, the Spanish theologian who was burned at the stake in 1553 for writing an anti-Trinitarian book, is the theological founder of our religion, he says it is the 16th century French theologian Sebastian Castellio who ought to be considered, even more so than Servetus, as the real founder of liberal Christianity, which is what Unitarianism started off as, liberal Christianity. For the first and most essential of these 3 controlling principles, he says, is that a generous tolerance of differing views. This is at bottom the outgrowth of an entirely new conception of religion, as centered not on dogma, but in life and character. And it is of the very essence of this conception of religion to regard freedom and reason not as incidental, but as fundamental conditions of a thoroughly wholesome existence of religion. Succinctly put, Unitarianism is more about tolerance than anything else. Talk about narrowing it down to 7 principles. Let's narrow it down to one word. Which is why Morse goes on to explain that Castellio was the first Protestant in history to emphasize and place on firm and enduring foundations this principle of tolerance. And so, as he argues, ought to be considered the founder of our religion. I need not go into Castellio's background here, for the only point I wish to make is that ours is not a religion rooted in theology. That's a big statement, right? Ours is not a religion rooted in theology. Despite our name Unitarian, as opposed to Trinitarian, our connection to Servetus was more in response to his cruel execution than to his ideas. According to one account, the wood, being green, burned so slowly that it took Servetus 3 hours to die. So whether we attribute its founding to Servetus' anti-Trinitarian theology who was burned for his writings, or to Castilio's emphasis on religious tolerance, we are led to the fundamental belief that we must not burn people for their writings, or otherwise punish or persecute them for their beliefs. Tolerance is what our religion is all about. Our additional commitments to freedom and reason are really because of how they facilitate this more fundamental commitment to tolerance. Right? If you think about it, tolerance requires us to deeply value and respect the freedom of others to express their own beliefs. If we're going to be tolerant, we have to believe in freedom. We have to value freedom. And it requires us to use reason to counter and encounter beliefs that are foreign to our own, rather than meeting them with irrational hostility and intolerance. To be open to the ideas of others, we must be reasonable people. Only 5 years after Castilio's death, Hungarian King John Sigismund Zapolya, who was the first ruler to officially adopt and recognize Unitarianism, passed the Edict of Torda in 1568, the world's first religious toleration law. And to prove just how central toleration as opposed to theology was to Unitarianism, the edict did not command that all of his subjects must embrace the king's new religion. Think about that. It's 1568. The king adopts a new religion, passes a religious law that does not require his subjects to accept his religion. You understand how extraordinary this is, I'm assuming, when you stop and think about it, but I want to emphasize it. Rather, this new law required them to not force their religion on others, and guaranteed that they should not be accosted for their own. Here's partly what it says. None of the superintendents or others shall abuse the preachers. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone, according to the previous statutes, and it is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment or by removal from his post for his teaching. That such an edict was issued in the middle of the 16th century is astounding, again, from a historical perspective, and sadly remains a little-known historical fact. I say this because the idea of tolerance wasn't widely talked about until during the Enlightenment period, beginning in the late 17th century. And it took some time before the concept evolved to the unprecedented standard first set by the Unitarians' Edict of Torda a century sooner. It would take another 100 years for this idea of tolerance to catch on throughout the rest of Western culture. In fact, the edict isn't even mentioned in historian Richie Robertson's new 900-page book on the Enlightenment, which includes a chapter entitled Toleration. But it's still a good book. Until the close of the start of the 18th century, the suggestion that we should tolerate different viewpoints was almost as unthinkable as it was offensive. The idea that we should tolerate other ideas was offensive. And that's kind of coming back. Through many centuries, intolerance seemed a virtue, Robertson writes. Through many centuries, intolerance was a virtue. It was no kindness to indulge people in error that would lead to damnation. The notion of tolerance was initially so offensive that the mere mention of it could get someone in hot water. I'm talking about in medieval terms. Toleration was also seen as traitorous. right? We see a lot of that today too, right? Somebody on one side shows a little agreement with somebody on the other, they're a traitor. Keep in mind, at the time, Christendom had been torn apart by the Reformation, which had led to all kinds of religious wars and cruelties. There was such much animosity, I should say, between the different religious sects, who were not only unwilling to harbor outsiders among them, but they were terrified of doing so. The 17th century Anglican preacher, Edward Stillingfleet, likened tolerance to a Trojan horse, which brings in our enemies without being seen. Additionally, Robertson points out, toleration was also considered wrong in principle, as it implied indifference to divine truth and disregard for ecclesiastical authority. So unlike today, when the ethic has been flipped, and those who are intolerant must at least pretend to be tolerant, no pretense was necessary 400 years ago. The idea of tolerance was considered an evil back then that must itself not be tolerated. The solution to all the violence and conflict which was driven by ideological and religious differences was obviously to force everyone to think alike. It was all those differences that were causing the problems. So let's just force everyone to think alike and that'll fix it. Yet it was also at this time that people realized that intolerance simply wasn't working. The extremely violent religious wars of the 16th and 17th centuries were still fresh on everyone's minds. After 100 years of constant bloodshed and brutality, something had to give. Robertson reminds us that in France, the war between the Catholics and the Calvinists that lasted 36 years, until 1598, I should say, had desolated that nation. The 30 Years' War in Germany between Catholics and Lutherans killed a third of the population. Horrific atrocities were committed during the English Civil War over issues of religious freedom. Thousands of Protestants in Antwerp, including men, women, and children, were murdered during the so-called Spanish Fury in November of 1576. Estimates that 5,000 to 30,000 Huguenots were massacred in the streets by Catholic mobs over a 3-day period in 1572 that has become known as St. Bartholomew's Night, which included the burning of thousands of homes. There's no telling how many actually died due to religious intolerance during this century of violence. Estimates are somewhere from as little as 40,000 to as many as 200,000. So despite the ethic of the day that believed it wrong to tolerate wrong thinking, especially when it comes to religion, governments and their citizens alike understood that some toleration was going to have to be necessary in order to end such chaos. Toleration had to happen for practical and political purposes, if for none other. But toleration was still considered a bitter pill to swallow, if not a sin. It was like selling one's soul. Intolerance, on the other hand, was considered a moral duty. As Robertson succinctly explains, all these conflicts, Catholic Spain against newly Protestant Netherlands, Protestant England against Catholic Ireland, Catholics versus Huguenots in France, Protestant armies afflicting Catholic populations, and vice versa in Germany, were all religious in origin. By the onset of the Enlightenment, therefore, it was increasingly felt that ways must be found for adherents of different religions to live together, if not harmoniously, then at least without open conflict. But again, although politically expedient, nobody liked the idea of tolerance. It was certainly not regarded as morally imperative, and if anything, was considered the very opposite. As toleration laws began to crop up, they were more like treaties meant to curtail violence, more like the ceasefire negotiated between Israel and Hamas just last week, than any sort of moral belief in the brotherhood and sisterhood of mankind. Robertson says the concept of toleration in both theory and practice has limitations. Toleration is sometimes granted reluctantly. What is tolerated is also disapproved of, right? To say you tolerated something implied that you also disapproved of it. So while some non-dominant religions came to be tolerated, they were not condoned. So to better make this point, let's consider what some of these toleration laws look like. Thanks again to Richie Robertson's book, The Enlightenment. The French Edict of Nantes in 1598 recognized, this wasn't a toleration law, okay? So this toleration law, 1598 toleration law, recognized that Catholicism is the official religion, but granted Protestants the freedom to worship so long as they did so in the areas that they already controlled. Huguenots, French Protestants, were obliged to observe Catholic holidays, obey Catholic laws regarding marriage and contracts, and they had to submit every book printed to censorship. That was the toleration law. 24 years later, as things evolved, the French Protestants were no longer allowed to hold burials during the day, and they were no longer allowed to have government representatives. Marriage between Protestants and Catholics became illegal. Protestant women could not be midwives. Protestants could not practice law or medicine, and soldiers were eventually sent to their homes to occupy their homes and their communities. That was under the religious toleration law. If they didn't like it, they were not free to immigrate elsewhere, and those who actually defied the bans had their belongings confiscated. And that is what toleration meant at the time. It was just short of not killing everybody. And it is actually in reference to the Huguenots that did manage to immigrate elsewhere that we get the French word refugee. They were the original refugees. In 1787, 185 years after the Edict of Nantes, a new Edict of Toleration allowed them to marry and to own an inherent property, but denied them their own worship and debarred them from public office. Similarly, in the United Provinces of the Dutch Republic, the Dutch Reformed Church was the official religion, although others were legally tolerated. And this meant that Catholics could not hold public office, nor build their own churches, but for a fee they could hold services in buildings that were not considered churches. Robertson says it was very limited liberty that allowed them to attend Mass only in private houses and usually under the cover of darkness. That's toleration. Although the Dutch tolerated other religions as well, you'd be interested to know that they considered Socinianism, which was the precursor to Unitarianism, an intolerable heresy. So it was not protected under the law. This is why Michael Servetus, as previously mentioned, was ordered to be burned alive by the reformer, John Calvin. As Robertson says, this notorious event, right, because of its sheer cruelty, showed that Protestants could be as repressive as the Catholic Church whose authority they had thrown off. By 1658, during the middle of the Enlightenment period, denial of the Trinity had become a capital crime in England. It was not until 1669 that Jews who had long been tolerated in Amsterdam were allowed to have their own synagogue. But the Jews there were still afraid to hold any public ceremonies for fear of persecution. And in the late 17th century, England and Scotland, their laws prohibited anyone who wasn't part of the established church from holding public office, including commissions in the army or sitting in Parliament. They were often harassed and abused by others and were fined or imprisoned if 5 or more were caught participating in illegal worship. These are but a few examples of what toleration initially looked like during the Enlightenment. The notion of tolerance began to evolve, however, toward the end of the century as Enlightenment thinkers began arguing that it is as wrong as it is absurd to try to force people to accept ideas that they don't believe. This was a new concept. Let's not force people to believe things they don't believe. Brand new. Who ever thought of that? And I'm not poking fun of them because, 400 years from now, people are going to look back at me and say, what the hell was wrong with that guy? Because we're stuck in our paradigms. We're stuck in what we're taught is right and wrong. It's hard to break free of that. So we don't want to judge these people of the past. We want to consider where we come from. So this notion was really the beginning of what would eventually flip the paradigm so that tolerance would be considered right, as it is today, and intolerance wrong. The crucial argument for toleration was that the conscience could not be forced, Robertson says. People could not be compelled to believe something that their consciences forbade them to believe. And that's pretty profound. In this history of enlightenment. But again, the point that makes our religion so exceptional, Unitarianism, the Edict of Torda passed way back in 1568, not the late 17th century. Unlike all of these other so-called toleration laws that often barely tolerated minority beliefs, was not only the earliest toleration law, but guaranteed that no one, no matter what their religion, would not be accosted by another or forced to believe something that they could not. No one shall compel them, the edict says, for their souls would not be satisfied. That's something that was almost discovered verbatim a century later by the Enlightenment thinkers. It's an unprecedented notion that rather than considering toleration something meant to benefit the government, right, so that the government doesn't have to deal with all of this conflict, Unitarians saw tolerance as something that was good and right for the individual. I mean, I just get goosebumps when I think about that. It just didn't happen back then. A focus on individual well-being, on the individual psyche, that somebody wouldn't be satisfied if you force them to believe something they can't. That's our religion. It would take another 100 years after Torda before the Enlightenment thinkers discovered this for themselves. Long after Unitarianism's historic edict of toleration, those Enlightenment philosophers who also inspired American democracy, along with our American branch of Unitarianism, realized that tolerance is necessary because it is impossible to force beliefs on others, even if by torture. Philosopher John Locke, for example, began his 1689 essay, A Letter Concerning Toleration, saying, I esteem that toleration to be the chief characteristic mark of the true church. Those who only emphasize their own orthodox beliefs, he said, are simply striving for power and empire over one another, are destitute of any charity, meekness, or goodwill, including for those who are not Christians, and thus fall short of being true Christians themselves. It was also in this same letter that Locke began to argue for the separation of church and state, which was an outgrowth of religious tolerance. Profound as this idea of tolerance was, however, Robertson says arguments like it still assume that toleration is something undesirable, that it would still be better if everyone agreed. It is not yet an argument against interfering with the sanctity of the individual conscience. So Locke got us close, but not there yet. That is to say, what one misses above all in Locke's argument is a sense that there is anything morally wrong with intolerance, or a sense of any deep concern for the victims of persecution, of the moral insult that is involved in the attempt to manipulate their faith. We're not there yet. Nearly another century would pass before another Enlightenment philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who agreed entirely with Locke's idea of separation of church and state, and that it is wrong to force religion on others or persecute them for theirs, would write that enlightened rulers must, get this, renounce the arrogant title of tolerance. Okay, so he's for the separation of church and state. He's for inclusivity. He's saying that enlightened rulers have to renounce tolerance because it's arrogant. So in 1784, toward the end of the now 18th century, one of the Enlightenment's most important figures considered tolerance an idea that was arrogant and should be renounced. And this was so because he did not believe tolerance went far enough. Given all those tolerance laws we talked about, we can understand why. It was not enough to merely tolerate those we disagree with. We had to fully accept them as equal citizens, and hopefully as equal neighbors. Preachers and scholars should still be free to continue publicly disagreeing and actually publicly saying whatever they want. But when it comes to laws and to governments, it is their task, Kant says, to leave everyone free to use his own reason in all matters of conscience. It was also in the late 18th century that the French philosopher Voltaire began campaigning against intolerance as immoral. Finally. Remember, for many centuries, intolerance was considered moral intolerance, or intolerance was considered moral, intolerance immoral. Voltaire, sickened by the bloodshed and the murder of intolerance, led to reverse the paradigm, calling tolerance the hallmark of humanity. Voltaire even took his definition beyond the scope of religion. It does not require any great art or studied elocution to prove that Christians ought to tolerate one another, he said. That should be obvious. Nay, I shall go still further and say that we ought to look upon all men as our brethren. How? Call a Turk, a Jew, a Siamese, my brother? Yes, doubtless, for we are not all children. For are we not all children of the same parent and the creatures of the same Creator? And this is the attitude that finally became dominant toward the end of the Enlightenment period. As Robertson puts it, the reluctance that it implied intolerance has been dropped. Toleration has mutated into acceptance. And it is this idea of tolerance that is still with us today, that we ought to respect one another because we are all fundamentally human, no matter our differences. That's what tolerance means to us, or should mean to us today. Not that we always live up to this ideal and are not still struggling to do so, but if we don't, then we have to go through ethical contortions to try to justify our intolerant behavior. usually by referring to false ad hominem attacks so we can blame our abuses on those we claim deserve it. But the arc of the universe does bend toward justice, and we continue to strive toward becoming a society, and I hope a planet, that is more inclusive and more accepting of one another. Yet it is also true, it would seem, that today we find ourselves as divided as ever. Even within our own liberal religion, founded upon the Enlightenment principles of freedom and reason and above all tolerance, that we are reverting to the doctrine of intolerance, striving, as Locke said, for power and empire over one another. Yet I think about how far we have come after so much suffering and struggle as a species and as a society, not only towards religious inclusion, but also toward greater inclusion about race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. Wouldn't it be sad if our religion, of all religions, which has long been ahead of its time when it comes not merely to practicing tolerance, but to upholding human dignity itself, should succumb now, at this crucial moment in history, to embracing intolerance and all the dogma and self-righteousness and authoritarianism and injustice that goes along with it? I remain very proud, if you can't tell, of my freely chosen religion's remarkable history and transformative principles dating back 100 years before the Enlightenment ever began, to courageous and visionary figures like Sebastian Castellio and King John Sigismund. And I will continue to uplift those fundamental principles that our religion has long stood for and that have held us steady for over 400 years: freedom, reason, and tolerance. Today, Unitarian Universalism itself needs to remember and reconnect with its precious Unitarian roots, because the world needs it. It needs all of us. It needs our brand of tolerance today more than ever. Thank you.
Our closing hymn today is number 323 from the hardback hymnal. If you'd like to rise and join us in singing. Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not that circle, make it wider still, till it includes, embraces all the living. Come wonder at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong or guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, to people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves, stand on their feet, see eye to eye with laughter and elation.
May we reach out to one another with open hands, not fists, May tolerance expand into acceptance and understanding. May love find its way and grow. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.